Steve. Thank you, City Club, and thank you, UW Debate. Less than a month from tonight, Washington voters will make history by passing a comprehensive ballot measure to legalize, regulate, and tax marijuana for adult recreational use. Initiative 502 will send a clear message to the other Washington that we know better than to continue with the failed policy of marijuana prohibition, a policy that has wasted taxpayer dollars and needlessly sacrificed the government's law enforcement credibility with the people. The misguided war on drugs has failed every legitimate public safety goal and instead accomplished only two things. It has turned this land of the free into the world's #1 jailer nation, and it has made violent criminal cartels fabulously rich. And ladies and gentlemen, the war on drugs is the war on marijuana. 502 is consequently limited to marijuana. It creates a comprehensive system to rationally regulate marijuana, much the same way that we've regulated hard alcohol ever since we ended that failed experiment some 80 years ago. A DUI provision would deter stolen driving. And it's much like the very familiar 0.08 blood alcohol standard that we have for alcohol. But sales of marijuana to youth would be treated as a felony. Sales of marijuana to youth would be treated as a felony, unlike sales of alcohol, misdemeanor furnishing of alcohol to minors. 502 will not impact Washington's medical marijuana laws. Authorized medical marijuana users will still be allowed to grow their own, and any dispensary that is legally operating today will still be able to operate after 502 becomes law. 502 will actually provide recreational and medical marijuana users alike with unprecedented protection from arrest, because it will no longer be a crime for adults over the age of 21 to possess an ounce for personal use. And adults will be able to buy that ounce at a retail store, confident that it was produced in Washington, free of herbicides, pesticides, mold, or other contaminants. 502 will thus be a boon to Washington agriculture. All marijuana for the recreational use must be grown by specially licensed Washington farmers who will be able to produce industrial grade hemp for commercial uses, even for biofuels. And like growers, processors will be licensed by the State Liquor Control Board, and recreational marijuana itself will be sold in standalone marijuana-only package stores operated by private Washington businesses, also licensed by the state. Public display and smoking in bars or other places where smoking is prohibited today will not be allowed. Advertising and store locations would be restricted to minimize exposure to people under 21. According to the state's Office of Financial Management, 502's new marijuana excise tax, when it's combined with retail and B&O sales tax, would generate more than $500 million in new tax revenues annually, money that now lines criminal pockets. Nearly $200 million would go to the state's general fund to help with this tenacious recessionary budget gap, and the remainder is directed to drug treatment, education, and research programs. Well, all of these are important reasons for voting for I-502. As your misdemeanor prosecutor in this city, I'm excited by the Get Smart approach that I-502 brings. Instead of using traditional blunt force methods, we're going to use something new and powerful, an economic tool. We're going to beat them in the marketplace. Police officers will have clarity and certainty. It's needed. And instead of criminalizing adult conduct, we're going to treat this as a public health problem. We're going to focus on public safety issues and reprioritize resources toward violent criminals. It won't happen overnight, and we'll continue to need the resources of Commander Pat Slack to make sure that the transition works out. And with that, let's see, I have 10 seconds left. I'm going to start off with the right. I appreciate it. You're very welcome, Steve.
Very good. Thank you. Pat Slack, let's go down to the other end of the table and hear why you think 502 is a bad idea.
Well, I'm against 502. I think there is time to do some reform on the marijuana laws that have been in effect for 75 years. I don't believe that I-502 is the right road. One of the things that happens, if voters pass I-502 this November, then this December, it becomes legal for anyone 21 years of age or older to possess an ounce of marijuana. But the stores that Mr. Holmes talked about will not be open. At the same time as this passes, it is passed on to the State Liquor Control Board to develop the rules and regulations and the implementation, which they do not have to have out until December of 2013. So for the first year, anyone that is purchasing marijuana will be purchasing it from the places that Mr. Holmes and the Pro Group are trying to stop the black market, whether it's from criminal organizations or entrepreneurs that live in your community. As of December 2013, whatever those rules and regulations are, it's basically the liquor store model that you just kicked out. So they're going to have to go out and find locations, get their licenses, and get set up. Now, how long that will take, I don't know. Whatever that time frame is, there'll be no tax revenue that will come in to the state of Washington during that time. So there's one of the things that kind of concerns me. The next is organized crime. We're all in agreement with stopping organized crime and stopping the violence in our community. Depending on the amount of dollars that the group has to have, or the state says they will have to have with the taxes that will be out there, will make the determination on whether organized crime will be involved. If you wind up charging $15 a gram for marijuana, then organized crime is going to be alive and well in the state of Washington, because they're going to undercut that amount. If the State Liquor Control Board puts any other inhibitors on this process, like the THC content, they say whatever, 10%, 15%, 18%, that's the maximum you can buy, and anything above that will then be a felony. You've just opened the door for the black market, because they're going to be out there selling that product. Last but not least, my major concern is the youth of today. And I mean no disrespect to anybody that's in their early 20s that when I say youth. The medical community and the stuff that I've read, and since I've sat on a lot of these debates and heard the different panelists, they talk about the frontal lobe of the brain, which is the decision-making part of your brain, and the development of that lobe is reduced with marijuana usage. The other thing that comes into play, the study just came out of Australia, is a reduction in IQ, 8 to 9 points in the youth. Those are irreversible effects. Another number that came out that interested me, and I admit I'm jumping to conclusions here, but in the state of Washington in 2010, 14,000 kids dropped out of high school. Another study says that if you smoke marijuana as a teenager, you're 4 times more likely to get low grades. The major reason for kids dropping out of high school are low grades. I think I-502 will enhance the amount of individuals that are out there that are under the age of 21 that will use marijuana. I think that's bad for society. There's a multitude of societal costs that we can ramble on and on about, and studies on both sides. I think that if you're going to make change, it should be a regulated change, that when the law comes into effect, that they could start getting the taxes, that law enforcement would know what the bright lines are that Mr. Holmes talked about. But in this first year or 2 years of I-502, we won't know. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. So now we'll get a second statement in support, or you can use your time for rebuttal or make some additional statements. Either way you want to do it. Reverend Braxton.
First of all, good evening to everyone. And I must share up front my trepidation as a Baptist minister. It scares the hell out of me to know that I've got timed remarks. So this is a bit counterintuitive for me. When I was a kid, my grandmother and my mother had a practice of smacking you in the mouth if you used certain dirty words, and one of them was the word hate. They just felt that it was too strong of a word, and as Christians we shouldn't use the word hate because we're supposed to love even our enemy. But hate is the only word I can use to describe the loathing I feel for marijuana and any other illegal or exotic drugs. I despise it, I loathe it, I hate it. I've had family members who have OD'd on various forms of drugs. I've had other family members and friends who thought they were just smoking a regular joint that was laced with some garbage, and it destroyed their brain, and now they're walking around in a zombie-like state, barely know their name, a shell of what they could have been, would have been, should have been. I've been in so many courtrooms during the course of my life that sometimes I forget who I'm there for. As a pastor, I've seen so many lives destroyed because of drugs. When I was 16 years old, I put on my letterman's jacket to go over to my girlfriend's house because I found out she was smoking reefer, and I told her that she had a choice between me or the drugs because she couldn't have both. I put on my letterman's jacket so that she could be clear on how great a guy she had in her life. And when I gave her the ultimatum, her response to me was, "I'm going to miss you." And I walked to the bus stop with tears rolling in my eyes. First time I ever experienced a broken heart, singing that old R&B song, "Everybody Plays a Fool." And so there's nothing about drugs that I like. I've never smoked a joint. I've never been high. I've never even smoked a cigarette or held one in my hand. I've done a lot of other things. The one thing I did right in my life is never treat my body like a garbage can and always be clear-headed enough to be able to be a split second faster than any danger or foe who was around me. That said, I support the decriminalization, the legalization, the regularization, the taxation of marijuana, because whatever was intended by this law, in practice, the war on drugs has been a war on black and brown people. Before Pete Holmes took over, in the city of Seattle, where African Americans make up less than 8% of the city population, they represented 59% of the people who were arrested for marijuana. Because what these drug laws have done, while it has not stopped the usage of marijuana, it is as easy as going down to the corner store and getting you some Fritos, nachos, Doritos, or some pork rinds, which usually people want after they smoke some marijuana. But it has equipped a less than colorblind criminal justice system with the tools it needs to be criminally unjust in the enforcement of these laws. If they aggressively enforced marijuana laws on Frat Row here at the University of Washington or in Bellevue, that by the time they got to MLK or Rainier Avenue, the jails would be full and you wouldn't be able to get the brothers in for the sake of the white boys and girls who would already be there busting it at the seams. And so the reality is that it has become one of the worst forms of institutionalized racism, in the words of Michelle McCullum, creating a cradle to prison pipeline that has underdeveloped the black community. Today in America, 1/3 of all 18 to 30-year-olds African American males have some form of criminal record, about 70% of that related to low-level marijuana usage. It has had a devastating impact. There are more black men and boys in prisons and in jails and in colleges and schools, not because we smoke more weed than white boys and girls, but because the laws are enforced in a very discriminatory pattern. It was Sigmund Freud who once said, to do the same thing and expect a different result is insane. So whatever was intended, what has happened has been crazy. And I think we ought to be sane enough to stop unknown crazy practice.
Thank you, Reverend Braxton. All right, Steve Sarich, no on 502.
Well, I guess I'm kind of in the minority here. I use marijuana every day.
I'm the minority.
not in that minority. I'm a medical marijuana patient. I've been protecting the rights of medical marijuana patients in the state of Washington for 10 years. I am for legalization. Patients tend to be for legalization. I've been raided by more people like Pat than anyone else in the history of the state of Washington. Never been arrested, just robbed a couple of times real good. I'm for legalization. Unfortunately, this is not legalization. Don't be fooled. And in order to legalize anything, first thing you must do is you must remove all the laws in the books that made it illegal in the first place. And I-502 does not remove one penalty, not one penalty from the Washington State Code. They will all still be there. The only difference is we're going to have some new laws. We're going to have per se DUID laws. Let me explain what per se is. That means simply by having a substance of a measurable amount in your system, you are automatically guilty. This has nothing to do with impairment. And many of you sitting out there in the audience, you should know if you're under 21, the per se limit is 0. You can have 0 THC in your system. The latest study from the National Institute on Drug Abuse done by Aaron Karshner and released in April proved that you can have active THC in your blood, not carboxy, not metabolite, active THC in your blood for up to 30 days after last use. What that means to you if you're under 21 and you smoked a joint last Saturday and you get pulled over next week, that is still in your system. And if you are questioned by an officer and he feels you are impaired, under this law, we've changed one other thing. A signed statement from a police officer that he believes that you were stoned, okay, is now prima facie evidence for probable cause. And they can take you to the hospital, they can take your blood, and if they find any trace of THC in your system, there goes your Pell Grant, there goes your college. You're going to have a DUID, driving under the influence of drugs, on your criminal record forever, which means once you've dropped out of school because you no longer have any Pell Grant, you're not going to be able to get a job either, because that driving under the influence of drugs is going to follow you everywhere. Again, this whole idea of per se DUIDs has nothing to do with impairment. This is the drug czar's latest strategy for prohibition in the United States. If you go to the ONDCP website, the drug czar's website, it will explain the whole strategy to you. Just do ONDCP drugged driving and it will explain it to you. It explains that drugged driving is not impaired driving. Drugged driving simply means you're getting caught with a measurable quantity of an illegal drug in your system. So what they are proposing is you can have a legal ounce of marijuana. What you won't be able to do is ever put it in your system and get caught with it. As a medical marijuana patient, I will never be under 5 nanograms. I've had my blood tested, and I'm probably at 4 to 5 times the legal impairment limit right now. I'm hoping I don't sound too impaired tonight. But that will be every medical marijuana patient, because we use it every single day. It does not cause us impairment. But again, the per se drug law has nothing to do whatsoever with impairment. If you think for one moment that you're going to see these legalized grows and these legalized pot stores, you can guess again. That is never going to happen. The federal government will come in and they will preempt this law, and they can preempt this law simply because we didn't make it legal in the state of Washington first, and we can. What they're proposing is absolutely possible. Under Title 21, Section 903 of the Federal Controlled Substances Act, the control of controlled substances is up to the states. But if you don't legalize it here first, the federal government can come in, and they will come in, and they will preempt it, and you won't see the growers, you won't see the stores, you won't see the tax money. All you're going to have left is a per se DUID limit.
All right. Thank you, sir. By the way, we'd like you to live tweet this if you feel like it. That'd be great. Hashtag is Civil Civics. And at City Club Live, if you want to do that too. So join in this conversation on through the magic of Twitter, if you would. Hashtag Civil Civics and at City Club Live. I would like to ask a few quick questions and then some more in-depth questions, just for some clarity. And first of all, Pete Holmes and Pat Slack, since we know what Reverend Braxton says, we know what Steve Sarich says, marijuana in moderate use bad for you?
For youth, I think the studies are, Commander Slack and I are in agreement that we want to control access to youth better than we're doing so now.
So, adults, over 21.
You know, I personally don't know what the studies are, Steve. What I'm concerned about is a philosophy that says we really don't have any business criminalizing adult private behavior as long as it's responsible. When it becomes a proper matter for government intervention is when it happens, for instance, out on the streets where you encounter other drivers and driving impaired. There's no question that marijuana causes impairment. There's absolutely no question about that.
And let me come back to that. I just want to know on the health issues and your own personal thoughts.
Sure.
Mr. Slack? Okay. Bad for you? Yeah.
What I've read,
Grab that mic.
What I've read, I would agree with what Mr. Holmes just said. You know, the youth is what my major concern is. I think when you get past the challenges with the brain, anything that you do to your body, I mean, chocolate could be bad for you if you have too much of it. We've heard of people that have died from overdosing from water. So moderation is the key to life. But I don't see, I haven't read anything that's, no one that I know has ever overdosed on marijuana and died. I've known some people that have smoked marijuana and made some bad decisions that have cost them their life. So.
All right. And also, I mean, fundamental truth here, what Reverend Braxton was saying. So, do you think that decriminalizing marijuana in any way, isn't it just you cut off one line of institutional racism, another one rises up like a hydrant? I mean, by decriminalizing it, do we get towards a more just society? Reverend Braxton?
Why would you say that?
That's what you said. You said we got to get, one of the reasons we should decriminalize is because we have this constant abuse of the law, putting young black and brown men and women in prison. So if we were to decriminalize it, would we see a reduction of that? Or would we just see it crop up somewhere else?
It has made blacks and browns the depersonalized cog in the ever-turning wheel in an ever-growing and expanding criminal industrial complex, which is one of the main growth industries in the United States.
Do the rest of you agree with that? Pete Holmes, as a city attorney, would it?
I think we have to be on guard for the next Jim Crow. Mass incarceration through the war on drugs is the new Jim Crow. And we do have to be on guard. I mean, that's the whole point of Michelle Alexander's work, that we not replace it with yet another way of keeping minorities, you know, in a disadvantaged state.
And Pat Slack, your thoughts on how drug laws have worked on black and brown people in this country?
Well, in reference to the 502, the ounce of marijuana, we're not putting people in prison for an ounce of marijuana. We are putting people in prison that are selling that ounce of marijuana. And under I-502, again, if you're not at a liquor store model under what the state guidelines are and you sell marijuana, then you're going to be committing a felony and you'll be subject to arrest no matter what your color is. One of the challenges that I see before us as a society, whether you like it or not, or you believe it or not, you have a large contingency of people out there today that are feeding, housing, and transporting themselves through the money that they get from the sale of marijuana. And if you take that away, and I mean, if you could totally take it away where the state model did away with the black market, what are they going to do? What are they going to sell? They still have to eat. They still have to live. And this is their way. So I think it's a real challenge, and my heart goes out to a lot of these people. I don't want to arrest my way out of this situation. I don't think that's right. Whatever your color is, putting people in prison has not worked. I've seen that. The only thing it does is encourage them to learn other crimes and how to be streetwise. So we need to change. I agree with that. I just don't see this as the way.
So Steve Sarich, on that point, and maybe a second one as well, you don't like this law, are you letting the perfect be the enemy of the good?
No, I'm just not looking forward to continuing and advancing prohibition more than it is today. If we legalize, if we actually legalize, that's one thing. But what this is doing, this is just a whole new strategy on the war on drugs. And the Reverend is correct. Anytime you have something like this, it is going to be young men of color who suffer first and suffer most. This is not legalization. You are not, maybe they won't get pulled over and arrested for their ounce of legal marijuana. What's going to happen is a drug recognition expert is going to show up and they're going to go, you look stoned, and that's prima facie evidence right there. You're going in and you're having your blood taken. This is insidious, taking your blood to find out what you've got in there. And just to give you an idea, the Office of Financial Management, it's in the Department of Licensing, estimates $4 million in new revenue the first year from the DUIDs. They only get 40%, they only get 40%, 60% of it goes back to the cities. That amount, what they're estimating is 10,000 people getting arrested for DUIDs here in the state just for having some THC in their system. And it's going to be young people, and especially young people of color, that suffer absolutely the most for that. So if the way you, what Mr. Holmes is describing is you put a per se drug into place simply so that young people will be discouraged from smoking pot. Anybody think that's worked so far? Because I'm not really seeing that happening.
Let me get a response from him on that, and Pete Holmes, and also a response to that notion that this is a Trojan horse here.
Well, it's not. You know,
start with the per se then.
Well, first to address the question that you raised, is this the perfect being the enemy of the good? You know, we're in a democracy, and this is the only initiative on the ballot this fall. This is our only opportunity to make progress, and we believe it is the only one that is going to pass. That makes it a perfect initiative, because it will pass. We have to get progress. We have to send that message to Washington, D.C. We have to go after prohibition. As far as legalization, Steve, I mean, define it however you want, but if you as an adult can walk into a state licensed store and buy an ounce of marijuana and walk out of there with it and use it on your own, that's pretty darn legal to me. And for the first time, even medical marijuana patients having really bona fide arrest protection. They do not have that now under Washington law. If you have up to an ounce, you cannot be arrested.
Right, there's some confusion that I would like you all to try to clear up, and one of it is on the dispensaries. Are these going to be Washington State pot stores, or are they going to be private companies licensed by this law? I mean, are the dispensaries going to stay in place, or are they going to go away and we'll see state stores instead? Pat Slack, how do you interpret that? And I'll go down the list.
I interpret it that.
Give him that, yeah.
I interpret it by what I read is that they will stand up stores that will only sell marijuana products and marijuana paraphernalia. And it'll be marijuana will be for sale there, up to 24 ounces of edible marijuana products, brownies, cakes, whatever, and up to 72 ounces of liquid marijuana products. And that's all will be sold in that store, not milk and bread and or anything else.
So
the medical marijuana co-ops, is that the right word used, collective, that is out there, I believe will eventually be in danger when this thing moves forward. And I say that, again, I'm not trying to throw a rock at the legislature. God, we know we love them. We voted them in. But they make some decisions of their own. And I want you to just think about this. All of a sudden, you have these state stores that are standing up and they're selling marijuana products. But the funding's not coming in, kind of like the 520 bridge and the tolls. So what do? Where's the funding going? It's through the medical marijuana group. They're dispensing. So if we cut that group out, all the individuals that are going to that group will then have to come to the state stores. And that will increase the tax revenue, which would be good for all the programs that are under I-502. So that's kind of what I see happening.
What do you see happening, Steve Sarich? And also, Pat Slack talked about a year there where there'll be, I mean, will there be nothing, or will the medical marijuana stores, dispensaries stay in business for that amount of time?
Well, if you listen to Allison Holcomb in her writings, she said that all of the current access points for patients will either have to go out of business, close their doors, or they'll have to be licensed under the Liquor Control Board model. And quite frankly, there's not going to be any model, ladies and gentlemen. So there's not going to be any stores. Any grower who would be stupid enough to get fingerprinted and have his fingerprints and his address sent through the FBI to the DEA so they know where he's growing an illegal substance under federal law would have to be nuttier than even the stoniest people I know. That's just not going to happen. Let me give you an example. There's a guy by the name of Chris Williams who was just convicted of growing medical marijuana in Montana in federal court. He was just sentenced last week to 45 years in federal prison. If you don't think these people are serious about enforcing federal law, guess again. The first thing the Liquor Control Board has to take into consideration, according to what it says in 502, they have to take A, B, C, D, and E into consideration when making rules and regulations for these growers and for these processors and for these stores. A, the first thing they have to take into consideration is the conflict between federal and state law on marijuana in the state of Washington. At that point, they can finish their coffee and they can go home, and no regulations are going to get written. The only thing that's going to happen is two things. They're going to close down the access points for the patients, because there's nothing in this law that says they can grow, and we're going to have the per se DUID law.
You know, just real quick, Steve Sarich, that is a doomsday scenario. Can I flip that around for just 1 minute? What happens to the people who are making money now through the medical marijuana clubs? Do they suffer if this law is passed?
Well, I love this fantasy about how much money everybody is making with medical cannabis collectives, because I certainly don't know many of them. And
so they're not making any money?
They certainly haven't been contributing to the No on 502 campaign.
All right, let me get Reverend Braxton, and then I'll go to you, Peter. So Reverend Braxton, it's that same question. Is this law going to end up putting more people in prison because the federal government's going to come in and the state government's not really going to implement it?
No, I don't think so. The problem with fear is it causes paralysis. Just to go back, digress a little bit, 12 out of the states that have decriminalized and 17 out of the states that have legalized, of the ones that have legalized, they have not shown an increase in the youth usage of marijuana. And those are facts. The city of Seattle, 7% population, 59% of arrests when the usage is the same. The urgency is there. So there's always somebody who's going to benefit from keeping it status quo. Somebody's making money now, they don't want the competition.
But you're not afraid of the federal government fingerprinting people and having them on file if this law passes?
No, the federal government's doing enough. I mean, in terms of the devastation of law enforcement, state, federal, and local to the African American community, that devastation is going on now. And something has to change.
So Pete Holmes, that same question about where we're going on this law. You hear what they're saying. This law is not just a Trojan horse. It's not going to be implemented.
Sure, but I've heard the arguments many times, and you're right that this is a lot of, frankly, fear-mongering. I'd like to point out, I'm the DUI prosecutor, the misdemeanor prosecutor in the city, and I can tell you a couple of things you should consider is that, first of all, the Fourth Amendment is still alive and well after 502 is passed, and you cannot be pulled over until you've given a police officer probable cause to believe that you're driving impaired. And then there has to be a separate finding by that law enforcement officer that you're impaired by something other than alcohol. And that's when the blood draw comes in. And that's something that will chew up a law enforcement officer's entire day. So I just want to make sure that we just don't overstate the magnitude of this issue. We know from the states where we have medical marijuana laws in place, in fact, 14 of them are zero tolerance on their per se law, not 5 nanograms as under 502. We haven't seen the DUI convictions go up. If this was a prophetic claim, we would probably have some data to back it up. We don't have any such data. You know, the notion, I want to just reply to a couple of things. You know, let's be honest about our facts too. Chris Williams was mentioned as having been arrested and convicted in Montana. In Montana, it's not legal to have a dispensary. Dispensaries are not legal. And a provider in Montana under state law can have 4 mature plants, 12 seedlings, and 1 ounce per patient for a maximum of 3 patients. Chris Williams was convicted on evidence of having 950 plants and $1.6 million. So let's be real when we're talking about this. And what the DEA has been doing here and elsewhere is enforcing the 1,000-foot rule. Don't have a dispensary within 1,000 feet of a school. And we have today in Seattle more medical marijuana dispensaries than we have Starbucks. And it's just not right. And we're being called on it. And that's what we're trying to do, is to get real. That's why 502 is being honest about it.
We're being called on it by the federal government?
We're being called, we will be. I mean, they're enforcing the rules, the minimal rules, such as the 1,000-foot rule. But, you know, to get more closer to the point, most of the arrests for individual possession do occur at the state and local level. 10,000 arrests annually in the state of Washington. Federal government is mostly focused on the large quantities being trafficked, especially across borders. So this is a very meaningful change in the state of Washington. That arrest protection is real, it's meaningful, and it means that our brown brothers and sisters are not going to be able to be arrested and hauled in for possession cases the way they can now. Outside of Seattle, you can still be arrested in Seattle, but you know, outside Seattle, it's a brave new world.
All right, just real quick, and then I want to talk about bloodstream. If I'm a medical marijuana patient, a year from now, can I grow a plant under 502?
You can do it today.
I know, but a year from now, when this law passes.
Everything that's legal today under Washington medical marijuana law will be legal the day after 502 passes.
Can I give it as a gift if it's below whatever the amount is for gift giving?
No.
Can't I today under medical marijuana?
No, you can't.
All right. That's what 50. Those are two. I just wanted you to comment on that as well, Steve Sarich. Those are some of the things that Central Washington talks about. I'm just curious what you think about that in terms of, can I have a plant a year from now if this law passes?
No, you cannot.
If I am a medical marijuana patient?
We don't know that at this point. But I can tell you right now, if you want to call this legalization, that will be illegal for any of you who are not patients.
Is that illegal for you? Is that illegal for you right now? Is that illegal for you right now?
No, it's not illegal for me right now.
Because you're a patient. You're in public, yeah, you're making a public display of it.
Oh, well.
He's not black, they ain't gonna arrest him.
All right, by the way, this particular strain is called Chum Gang, named after our president.
So, a couple of questions about what Pat Slack said about the kind of marijuana, and then what happens in the bloodstream, and then you folks will have questions too. First of all, Pat Slack, one of the things that you said was that the price point is going to be problematic if this law passes, and we'll still have perhaps organized crime involved if it's at $15 a gram, and that the pot's too strong, and it's very strong. Is that going to be regulated in some way under this law?
Well, I guess that's the question and where Mr. Sarich was coming from. If the law passes, then, as I understand it, in December, if you're 21 years of age or older and you have an ounce of marijuana, you're legal, up to an ounce. But you can't buy it anywhere until the store gets online. So if you're buying it, then that's your illegal act. The next thing is the rules and regulations will be turned over to the State Liquor Control Board. So what are those rules and regulations going to be? None of us know. So what are they going